Hello and welcome to the Camo Grind, a series where I analyze every weapon in Advanced Warfare to help you complete every camo challenge by giving specific strategies, loadouts, and more, including ranking every weapon variant in order of usefulness based on several factors to give you an idea of what you should use and what you should redeem. I don't, however, just make this stuff up. My advice and opinions are based on thorough testing, in-game coded stats, and of course my own experiences in using these weapons and weapon variants, of which I own many, to complete every marksman challenge and earn every royalty camo. Today's episode is on the XMG light machine guns, another one of Advanced Warfare's pretty unique weapons. If they buffed up the stats just a little bit, I could see it even being a kill streak, just like the Death Machine minigun in the past. Although, even with the way they are, I find them quite fun to use, and I think they're very competitive. You can do really well with them, even against the standard Balinese Someone meta. Maybe not at a high tier competitive level, but in pub matches, absolutely. Some people are saying they're getting a bit tripped up by it though, so that's why we will cover it here today. It is time to rank the XMG variants in order of what I suggest you use. I put tons of research into this, but remember they are just opinions and you're more than welcome to debate the order with me. In first I have the XMG Bacon and Eggs and the Royalty. I don't think that should be very surprising though, although I will cover in a bit here that the Meat and Potatoes is basically the same variant, with just a couple minor and almost irrelevant changes, so if you have either of them you're good to go. So the Bacon and Eggs definitely focuses on damage, as you can see, and what it does is it buffs the mid-range damage. The regular XMG damage profile is 25, 20, 20, and with this variant it brings the mid-range up to match the close range and give you 25, 25, 20, basically just like a massive range buff to that close range drop-off. That is, of course, very good to have. The only downside to the Bacon and Eggs is a 25% increase in recoil, and we kind of talked about this in the last episode, how recoil affects akimbo weapons. It is true that it might be harder to handle, the crosshairs will kick up a bit more than they used to, but the XMG has something special that the SAC-3 does not, and that is lockdown mode. Ever since one of the very early patches in this game, when they buffed the effectiveness of lockdown mode, making it much tighter, this weapon became very viable. It's all about the lockdown mode. You should definitely be shaping your playstyle around using lockdown. It's kind of my theory that when people say they don't really like the XMGs or it's causing a ton of problems, that maybe they're not using lockdown as much as they should, or they're just rushing into scenarios that don't let you lock down in time, and you just have to spray and pray and hope for the best. Putting yourself in positions to watch objectives or just setting up really long-range gunfights is what I think you should do to exceed. Adding Exo Hover to your class and locking down in the air is especially fun. If you've probably heard that trick before, but we'll talk classes and strategy later. So with the Bacon and Eggs, because of all that stuff I just said, because of how effective lockdown mode is, recoil is completely irrelevant when you're in that mode. Recoil is non-existent, and since I think you should almost always be using lockdown mode when you can, this recoil nerf shouldn't affect you that much. And even when you're not in lockdown and need to spray to get a kill, it's not that bad. Now there is one last little quirk to the Bacon and Eggs, and that is a headshot multiplier buff going from 1.4 to 1.6, which is kinda weird. Usually changing body multipliers is more of a sniper rifle thing, and in fact this is one of 4 weapons where a variant can change a body multiplier of any kind. If you're curious, the other 3 are the Mors, the Atlas 20mm, and the RW1. But the thing is with this change is that it really isn't a big deal. If you do a bit of math, you'll find that in no way does this affect your shots to kill. 1.4 and 1.6 both accomplish the same thing, so this buff is only ever going to help anything when you're getting headshots on an injured enemy, depending on how much health they have, it could matter, or if you're getting headshots through a certain type of wall at a certain angle. What I'm getting at is those scenarios are pretty rare, and I doubt you will ever really be affected by that buff, which is why the Meat and Potatoes is basically the same variant. It also has a damage buff, and it is the exact same damage buff as the Bacon and Eggs, which is really what matters, and your recoil is also nerfed, but this time only by 10% instead of 25%. So you might say, well, this variant is better then, but the Meat and Potatoes doesn't have that little headshot multiplier buff thing, so it's a trade-off of the minor buffs. Do you want slightly better recoil with the Meat and Potatoes, or that headshot multiplier that has a little effect with the Bacon and Eggs? Honestly, I would take the recoil over that headshot multiplier, but the reason the ranking is the way it is actually because of the XMG Royalty. The Royalty variant was part of the wave of royalties that grants you a flat 10% range buff, which is honestly all it takes to break the little tie we have here. So if I were to rank this honestly, I would say the royalty is the best, then the meat and potatoes, and then the bacon and eggs, but it just works way better to lump the royalty together with the variant that it is similar to. I don't want to make an exception just for the XMGs, and honestly, if I had both the bacon and eggs and the meat and potatoes, I'd probably use the bacon and eggs anyway, just because the change is so minor, and I like using elite weapons because they're cool. That pretty much explains the big tie we have going on here in first and second, but in third we have the Venus and Mars, a bit of a different variant, but it is still a damage increase, and it is still the same damage increase once again, 25, 25, 20. This time though, your range is nerfed by 15%. Now this only really matters at long range, because of course at short range, nobody cares, you'd be dropping from 25 damage to 25 damage, that's just not a thing. So even with that 15% range nerf affecting your long range, this is still a great variant, because you have to think about it. If you're using the base XMG at 25, 20, 20, you'd be dropping off to that same 20 damage way sooner at the shorter range drop-off distance, so this variant is definitely a big positive over that, still granting you a much longer short range essentially. So there are the top 3 for this gun. There are tons of decent variants though, including the beer and pretzels, the yin and yang, the chicken and waffles, and the bread and butter. Now I will briefly cover the bread and butter in case you're wondering why it's all the way down here. Maybe you were thinking the way I was at first. I figured, well, fire rate is good, increasing that increases time to kill, but usually the downside of that is that it's harder to control the weapon. When you're in lockdown mode though, it's pinpoint accurate no matter what, so surely the best thing to do is max out the fire rate, get as much as you can, and this weapon will destroy everything. Well, not quite the case. The thing is, the variants of the XMG cannot change lockdown mode fire rate. The fire rates are different if you didn't know. The base XMG fires at 600 RPM regularly and 800 RPM when in lockdown mode, and that is for the single gun, so combined 1200 and 1600 RPM respectively. When you get a variant like this that increases fire rate, that only changes the regular mode fire rate. For example, the bread and butter changes it from 600 to 857 RPM. A big change, but lockdown mode will actually make you slower, bringing you back to that same 800 RPM. That doesn't change in any variant. The only thing that changes your lockdown mode RPM is the rapid fire attachment. That will bring you up to a powerful 1000 RPM when in lockdown mode, and that is very good. But the bread and butter, not so much. Your long range damage is also decreased from 20 to 17, which is kind of bad in some situations. Basically, this variant is on the edge of negative because it really depends on your playstyle. This one is definitely up to opinion. This variant is all about making it much more viable to run around with this weapon. If that sounds like you're using lightweight and gung-ho and exo overclock, then this variant may be the best one out there for you. For me though, I'd say it's almost negative. I wouldn't use it most of the time because I love lockdown mode, and not that you can't use lockdown mode with this variant, but when you're in lockdown, there's nothing positive about this variant. All it's doing then is that long range damage nerf, which can definitely affect you if you're going for those long range kills, which I don't really like. So it can be a good variant depending on what you use it for, but I figured I should clean up any misconceptions. This is not a super variant because the rate of fire buff does not carry over into lockdown mode. If it did, it would be truly amazing, and stacked with rapid fire, insane. It's probably a good thing that it doesn't. Now, past the base variant, we have 3 variants I wouldn't use at all: the Death and Taxes, the Black and White, and the Smoke and Mirrors. Definitely not the Smoke and Mirrors, it's in last for a reason, and I swear I've gotten them the most by far out of all XMGs and supply drops, but nothing I can do about that. It's time to discuss some camo challenges though, and some general gameplay pointers. You've already heard me rave about lockdown mode, and here are a couple of classes I might use, but in case you're one of those people who doesn't really enjoy using this thing, allow me to briefly talk about it. At 600 RPM times 2, you get 1200 RPM, being tied for the fastest fire rate in the game, with a few things, one being the base SAC-3 because it's also akimbo, another being the EPM-3, which barely counts because it's single shot, and the last being the EM-1, which is supposed to behave like a solid laser. That's how you know this is fast. I will admit one thing is slightly faster, being a positive fire rate variant of the SAC-3, topping out at around 1300 RPM. But wait, take into account lockdown mode, and you get 1600 RPM, the fastest gun in the game. But wait, rapid fire, 2000 RPM, 2k RPM. That's insane when you remember that the damage on this thing is also nothing to laugh at. Much better than something like the EM1. The shots to kill being 4 to 5. That exactly matches the AK-12, but with 2.7 times the fire rate. A fire rate being almost double the EM1. Well, I bet it's hard to control the recoil on something like that, right? Well, no, it's pinpoint accurate. This is truly an insane weapon in my opinion. It melts people, and the only thing balancing that crazy power is just that it's really awkward to get yourself in the right situation and transition into that lockdown mode in time. Really though, if you play your cards right, you can do that pretty effectively. I don't really have any complaints about this weapon. It's really fun to use, it's very rewarding to just mow people down, and I find it to be very competitive overall. So hopefully I've managed to convince you of the awesome strength of the XMG. I just kind of hope me being such an XMG fan doesn't make any camo advice I try to give kind of lame, because it will be harder for me to think of things to say since I didn't have any real troubles with them myself. I don't have much experience overcoming any issues. But let's take a look. We start with good old long shots. This would have been really tough when the game first launched and lockdown mode wasn't very effective, but now this should be one of the easiest weapons in the game to earn long shot medals with. You just have to plant yourself in a good place like the roof on Riot or that midsection on the jungle map, Instinct I believe, and you can easily pick people off at long range. This shouldn't be an issue if you focus on the lockdown mode. 80 hipfire kills, well, just like the last episode for the SAC-3, for some reason I don't think anyone's going to have any trouble getting hipfire kills, because, well, akimbo weapon. Although I shouldn't say that because I don't know if lockdown is considered aiming down your sight, and I can't test it since I did the challenge. I could see it going either way because you're kind of aiming, but you're also technically still hip firing, just very accurately. So if you haven't done this challenge, feel free to get a couple kills in lockdown and see if they do indeed count towards it or not. But either way, running around isn't too hard anyway. Now would be a great time to bust out the bread and butter variant if you have it. But taking a look at these next few challenges, bloodthirsty medals, strafe medals, and skeet shooter medals, and of course the no perks and no attachments, there's really no point in me saying the general stuff that I say all the time. You've heard it all before by now. There's really no secret method that you need to employ to earn all these really quickly. All you do is run around and kill people. That's pretty much what the game is all about, and you'll earn these over time, no worries. So instead of talking about that, I'll sneak in some final little tips about the XMG that you might not have thought of. One being, these things are incredibly effective at taking down air support, or really any kill streak imaginable. In lockdown, you can drill into stuff like UAVs, warbirds, or even paladins if you're on the right map, like Riot or Sideshow or Biolab. So give that a try. I like to have an XMG class at all times. If my team's getting trekked and enemy warbirds are getting called in every 30 seconds, it's very satisfying to just look up at it and have it gone in seconds. It's much easier to take stuff down with these LMGs than it is with something like the Stinger even, and there's no need to switch weapons and all that stuff, so definitely keep that in the back of your head. No need to fear warbirds when you've got one of these things. Very good for ranking up and earning score streaks as well. And one other tip is if you're focusing on using the XMGs, I find it helps to have two classes set up like this. If you really favor one playstyle, well maybe not, but I like to choose between these two depending on the map. So if it's something like Instinct or Sideshow or Defender, something with very long range engagements, I would go with a lockdown mode centric class like this. Get the overcharged Exo Hover on there with rapid fire for sure, and I'm going to be using one of those top 3 plus damage variants if at all possible, whereas for a run and gun class, which I might use on a map like Urban or Comeback, I might prefer one of the fire rate variants like the Chicken and Waffles or the Bread and Butter. Pair that with a laser sight, lightweight, gung-ho, and overclock, and you've got yourself a very effective run and gun class. This just perfectly shows what I mean when I say the variant ranking thing isn't an end-all be-all. It's pretty rare that one variant is just clearly better than everything else in every scenario. There's usually quite a bit of room for debate, and this is a case where depending on the map and depending on your playstyle, one variant could prove much more effective than one that I ranked as supposedly better. Anyway, I like having these options to choose from every game, but I'll leave that up to you. So there you have it, the XMG. Hopefully if you were one of the people who didn't like using these things, I've helped you see it in a new light, or maybe I'm just alone in my love for these quirky weapons. Next episode we'll be taking a look at the AMR-9 due to your suggestions. I can see why it would warrant a guide. It is certainly one of the more awkward SMGs. I hope you've learned some cool stuff about how awesome the XMG is, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.